Hey there, friends. Go ahead and dim the lights, settle into your blanket, maybe sip some tea. Tonight, we're drifting into one of humanity's favorite pastimes, doing incredibly questionable things in the name of medicine. Because, when you're sick, who doesn't want their doctor to suggest drinking powdered mummy? Yes, that was a thing. But don't worry. We'll float our way through it together, calm and slow. Let's start simple. For centuries, people believed that bad smells caused illness. Not germs, not viruses, just bad vibes in the air. They called it miasma. So, naturally, the treatment was to carry around flowers, herbs, or anything strong smelling enough to overpower the funk. Plague doctors with those bird-like masks? Yeah, they weren't trying to be creepy. The beak was literally a built-in air freshener. Stuffed with lavender, mint, or sometimes vinegar-soaked sponges, it was basically the medieval version of a Glade plug-in. And did it work? Of course not. But people still felt reassured because at least their last breath smelled vaguely floral. Now, let's slide over to another favorite, bloodletting. The idea was simple, too simple. If you were sick, it was obviously because you had bad blood. So doctors helpfully drained some out, usually with a knife or a very enthusiastic leech. Because what says healing like feeling lightheaded and watching your life drip into a bowl? Royalty, of course, loved this. It made them feel like something was actually being done. Take George Washington, America's founding father, with that whole "I cannot tell a lie" vibe. Well, he couldn't tell one, but his doctors sure could tell him to bleed a lot. When Washington caught a throat infection in 1799, they bled him repeatedly. For times in one day, nearly half of his blood volume was removed. Spoiler, he did not survive. But the doctors proudly reported they had done all they could, which was true, if by all you mean drained him like a wine barrel. Let's drift over to something sweeter. Literally, medieval doctors thought honey was the cure-all. Wounds? Honey. Eye infections? Honey. Digestive issues? Yes, honey again. And honestly, they weren't entirely wrong. Honey does have antibacterial properties. But people took it a bit far. In Japan, there was once a practice called mellified man brace yourself. The elderly would supposedly volunteer to eat nothing but honey until every fluid in their body was replaced with it. After death, they were entombed in honey for a century, then sold as a medicinal candy, a kind of human honey hybrid snack. Imagine unwrapping that at the apothecary counter. But we're just warming up, because one of history's most enduring treatments was trepanation. Fancy word, very simple concept. Drilling a hole in your skull to let out the evil spirits. If you had headaches, seizures, or just seemed moody, well, open head surgery without anesthesia was apparently the vibe. Archaeologists have found skulls with multiple holes, suggesting some patients survived this, which is almost worse because it means they sometimes came back for round 2. And speaking of heads, another medieval prescription was to rub animal parts on your temples to cure ailments. For migraines, ground up deer antlers. For epilepsy, powdered skull of a hanged man. Because why stop at medicine when you can also add a touch of true crime to your health plan? Of course, none of this was limited to peasants. Royals, nobles, emperors, they all lined up for these treatments. The fancier you were, the stranger your prescriptions became. Cleopatra, for instance, allegedly bathed in donkey's milk to preserve her skin. Was it effective? Well, her complexion was famous, so maybe she just smelled like a dairy aisle. So, let's keep floating along the river of weird remedies. We've done bloodletting, skull drilling, and honey men. But medicine, much like fashion, always finds a way to get stranger. Take mercury, for instance. Today, we know mercury is toxic, but back then, people thought it was basically liquid magic. Shiny, mysterious, and why not? Probably good for you. In China, mercury pills were advertised as a path to immortality. Spoiler again, they did not make you immortal. In fact, one emperor, Qin Shi Huang, the guy who built the terracotta army, downed mercury pills religiously and, surprise, died in his late 40s. Which, in fairness, was kind of immortal compared to everyone else he killed. But still, not quite the eternal life he ordered. Europeans weren't much better. Mercury was used to treat syphilis for centuries. The logic went, disease makes you sweaty, mercury makes you sweat even more. So, cured, patients would be slathered, steamed, or even injected with the metal. Doctor said cheerfully, "A night in the vapor bath and you'll be sweating like a fountain," which was true. You just also lost your teeth and sanity in the process. Now, let's take a moment to appreciate perhaps the most famous medical fad of all, mummy medicine. Yes, literal ground-up mummies imported from Egypt. For about 500 years, Europeans thought the secret to healing everything from headaches to stomach cramps was sprinkling a little powdered pharaoh on your toast. Apothecaries sold it by the jar. Nobles kept it in their cabinets like we keep Advil. Even King Francis I of France supposedly carried mummy powder everywhere, in case of emergencies. Imagine being at a banquet, eating too much roasted swan, then casually reaching for your ancient corpse dust to settle your tummy. Delicious. And speaking of digestion, let's waft over to one of the most baffling ideas in medical history, the tobacco smoke enema. Yes, you heard correctly. In the 18th century, doctors thought that blowing smoke, literally, into someone's rear end could revive them from drowning. Drowning, seizures, colds, you name it. They actually built kits with bellows and long tubes. These were kept along the River Thames, like little life-saving stations. If someone fell in, instead of CPR, you got, well, smoked. Eventually, they realized it didn't work, but not before the phrase blowing smoke got a whole new layer of meaning. Royal hypochondria deserves its own category. Many kings and queens were obsessed with their health and happily volunteered for whatever new miracle cure came along. Take Charles II of England. He had a personal concoction called the King's Drops. It was made from crushed human skulls soaked in alcohol. Yes, the king's signature health drink was skull vodka. He sipped it regularly, and when he felt weak near the end of his life, his doctors doubled down. He died anyway, shocking, I know. Or consider Catherine de' Medici, Queen of France, who believed in astrology-based medicine. Treatments were scheduled around the stars, so if you broke your arm on the wrong moon cycle, well, bad timing for you. Maybe come back next Thursday when Saturn is in a better mood. And then there were the early cosmetic treatments. For pale skin, ladies would smear on creams made with lead. Smooth porcelain finish? Yes. Also, slow poisoning. Elizabeth I of England was famous for her white face paint, which contained lead and vinegar. Over time, it ate away at her skin, so she wore even more to cover it up. A vicious circle, but hey, she kept the look consistent. Let's also not forget the cure-all of all cure-alls: urine. Yes, medical texts across cultures recommended it. Romans gargled it for dental health. Medieval Europeans washed wounds with it. Some folks even drank it for internal cleansing. And if you're thinking, surely royalty didn't stoop to that, oh, they did. Wealth didn't save you from weird advice. Sometimes it just meant you could afford the premium stuff like bottled urine from healthy young boys. By now, you might be wondering, were all historical treatments dangerous nonsense? The answer is mostly yes, but a few worked by accident. Leech therapy, for example, is still used today in microsurgery to improve blood flow. Honey does help with wounds. Herbal remedies like willow bark eventually gave us aspirin. So maybe, hidden under the mountains of powdered bones and smoke enemas, there was a tiny flicker of truth. But honestly, history's medical experiments are less about science and more about comfort. People were scared, sick, and desperate. And desperate people will try almost anything. If someone tells you that bathing in donkey's milk will keep you young, or that your headache can be cured by drilling a hole in your head, well, when the alternative is suffering, you might just say, why not? So tonight, as you drift off, be grateful you live in a time when medicine is at least slightly less terrifying. No leeches on your arm, no powdered mummy in your tea, no mercury smoothies on your breakfast tray, just regular old antibiotics and maybe an overpriced bottle of ibuprofen. A real luxury when you think about it. Sleep well, friends. And remember, if your doctor ever suggests an enema kit with tobacco smoke, it might be time for a second opinion.